I've been living in this house for about a year and a half. This happened about the third month of living there. At the time, I considered my house mildly haunted. First, there's the poltergeist. I call him Knox. It's okay as long as you don't ask it any questions. It likes to answer on occasions, and the answers aren't always nice. At the start of things, all Knox would do is, well, knock. Once I acknowledged fully that Knox was an actual presence, it's not just the house settling, I started to notice it really liked to give its opinion on things. For that reason, I no longer listen to the radio, podcasts, or videos on speaker, only earphones. I suspect others, far braver than I, would be tempted to get better acquainted with Knox. I consider that an extremely rash notion. I don't know what Knox actually is, and what it can do. What if it's some weird eldritch being, living in the walls, that would drive people insane if they were ever to reveal itself? Being cordial with it is as far as I'm willing to go. In that regard, the other rule with Knox is that if it doesn't want you to be somewhere, it'll tap sharply twice. 1 for yes, 2 for no, is the clearest communication we've established between us. If I hear 2 knocks when entering a room, I just quietly leave and come back later. I've never challenged Knox about it, and I'm not finding out what's happening if I do. After a while, though, I started to notice that Knox would also move things. Plates and cups, mostly. Sometimes a cup of water. Once a cup of milk I'd left unfinished would be empty in the morning. More disturbingly, if I left food out, bread in particular, I would notice small but obvious bites taken out of it. Not mouse bites from the clearly human teeth indentations. I guess that was my motivation to keep the house clean. And in this fashion, Knox and I had gone on about our existence. Then there's the basement. I almost didn't buy the house because of the basement. There's a strange, creepy space in there, jutting into one of the walls. It's only a couple of feet deep, about chest height, and 4 feet across. It also has a yellow-painted scaffolding in it, crisscrossing it at diagonals, so it's just about impossible to store anything in it. I don't know what it's used for, but it has a presence about it. You just know you're not supposed to be in there, or even near it. I've decided not to store anything in the basement because of that. There's the house's water heating unit down there, and some leftover junk from the previous owner. Old wooden tables and chairs. I don't go there, unless it's absolutely necessary. On the handful of occasions I've had to be down there, it was only during the day. And even then, I follow the rules that as children we intuitively know when crossing dark spaces. You don't make any loud sounds or unnecessary noise, lest you annoy it or draw its attention. You don't run or rush what you're doing, lest you make it think you're afraid of or aware of it. But neither do you tarry and test its patience. And when you're done, you turn off the light and you do not look back. Here's what you need to know before I tell you the rest of the story. I'm scared of the dark. I have always been scared of the dark, since I was young. I'm not sure why. Since I've moved out by myself, learning to deal with the dark has been quite an adjustment. In those early months living here, between Knox and my nyctophobia, I'd taken to the habit of remaining in my room at night. I do all the dishes, set everything up for the next day, turn off all the lights downstairs while there's still light, then I take my provisions for the night up to my room. Snacks, drinks, instant noodles, etc. My bedroom has an attached bathroom, so there's no need to leave during the night. I even have a mini fridge in my room and a kettle. Once the bedroom door is closed, I was in my little sanctuary of pajamas, computer games, and chill hip-hop music. And my Kindle reader, of course. Knox even appeared to have the etiquette not to disturb me while I was in there. Downstairs, night would slowly fill the house and would remain still and calm till dawn. Save for the very rare need for me to creep down to grab something quickly, the elements of the house were pretty well left in harmony. I left it alone, and it left me alone. That was until my brother and his family decided to visit. I'm not close with my brother. We both tried our best to bond, I believe that, but we're just different people. That aside, I welcomed his daughter, his wife, and him happily into my new house. They plan to stay a couple of nights over the weekend. There's only one other bedroom besides mine just down the landing. Not big, but they made do. My brother and his wife would sleep in the bed, and I had a mattress for their 5-year-old daughter, Ava. Ava was a quiet child, shy, polite, and obedient. She spent most of her time in the house reading her books, scribbling her art, and watching videos on her tablet. It was about 7:30, just after delivery dinner, when Ava approached me. "Uncle, who's the little girl that lives here?" If you haven't gathered, I spook easily, and this was classic spooky. My first thought was whether Knox had revealed itself to her. It's not the first time Knox has messed around with a house guest. But not wanting to alarm Ava, I responded with a reassuring smile. "What little girl?" "The one standing by the door of the kitchen," she said, looking towards the aforementioned kitchen. "I don't like how she looks at me. She's scary." Ava nodded in a whisper. I swallowed and felt it get stuck in my throat. Is she still there?" Ava shook her head. I walked over to the kitchen as casually as I could and took a look at the door there. It led to the basement, and it was always shut. I did not open it, instead going over to the little key rack that hung beside the sliding glass door out back. On the rack was an old-fashioned, slightly rusty key. This was the basement door key. Grabbing it, I turned smartly and locked the door with a loud clunk. I tested the handle firmly, and the door didn't budge. I went back to Ava. "There, it's locked now. Nothing's coming out of the basement." That seemed to satisfy her, and she went off to find her mother. I did think I should have told my brother and his wife, but for one reason or another, I just never brought it up in conversation. They all went to bed early that night, and I retreated into my room. I noticed before falling asleep that despite the lack of wind, the house was creaking a fair bit. On reflection, I think Knox was trying to tell me something. I was woken up by a sharp rack on my door. I came out to find my brother looking flustered. Ava was missing. My brother had roused and found her gone from the mattress. The guest bedroom door was wide open, so he thought she must have gone to the bathroom. When she didn't come back after a couple of minutes, he went to check. She wasn't in the toilet. That's when he'd woken up his wife. They'd been searching for a while before he decided to wake me up as well. I joined them in their search immediately, and we flipped on every light in every room and called for Ava. We looked into every cupboard, behind every curtain, and under all the furniture that she might fit under. Finally, my brother headed into the backyard to see if his daughter was there. It was the only door to the outside that Ava could possibly have unlocked. His wife was fervently going towards all the rooms again. To the worried feeling I had in my guts was added a sense of cold dread. I knew where Ava had gone. I glanced over to the key rack. The basement key was missing. I was certain I'd placed it back. I tested the handle to the door and found it unlocked. Swinging the door open, I was greeted by a pitch-black darkness that seemed to flow out and chill me to the bone. 2 sharp raps sounded overhead. 2 for no. I looked up a little bit surprised that Knox would care for my well-being. Or was it also scared of the basement? But my 5-year-old niece was down there, and scared as I was, I had to go down. I considered for a fleeting moment to call my brother and sister-in-law to join me. But that just didn't feel right. It was one of those rules I just knew had to be followed. Don't show it that you're scared. Don't reveal you even know it's there. Maybe that's why they always split up in horror movies. Just rules we all know, but never tell each other. I flicked the switch onto the basement. No light came on. The bulb must have gone out. Fish sticks. "Ava!" I called out, catching the faintest sound of movement below me. I turned on my phone flashlight and carefully descended down the flight of stairs. The last thing we needed was for me to fumble down the stairs and break a leg. I scanned the basement with the light, and the legs of the old furniture gleamed back at me, while casting shadows that spelt profane things across the wall. It was getting cold down here. My breath was misty, and the bare flesh on my arms prickled. I didn't waste time looking under the tables and chairs. I went straight for the strange space. Sure enough, there past the old diagonal scaffolding was a bundle of dark hair and pajamas. She looked to be a lot further in than the 2 feet deep I knew the space to be. "Ava," I whispered. She sniffed and turned her head to look at me, tear-stained and wide-eyed. "Come out, Ava. It's okay, I'm here." She shook her head at me, not budging. I took a deep breath, then reached in between the scaffolding. Despite having to contort myself between the bars, I was able to grab Ava under the arms and gently gather her to me. She broke out in a loud sob as she clutched at my shirt and buried her head into my shoulder. The cold suddenly flipped into suffocating heat. I felt sick from under the change in temperature. I still was guided only by the light of my phone, and I headed for the stairs. Was it dark? I felt my visibility was poorer than before. The stack of upside-down furniture, though being no more than a few feet in length, suddenly felt like a corridor stretching away. I swatted my hand holding the phone as I tried to push back the darkness. The flare of my light did little to the mad dance, throwing shadows in all directions, but I didn't stare too hard at the shapes in the dark. I didn't want to make out the silhouette of a little girl. Instead, I focused all my effort into pushing past that pile of furniture, stumbling up the stairs and bursting into the orange light of the kitchen. I collapsed to my knees, still holding Ava, and was panting like I'd run a marathon. My sister-in-law saw us, gasped, and immediately ran over. She was weeping in relief. My brother came in from the backyard then. As I released Ava to her parents, I caught something from her little fist, the basement door key. "Why did you go down there, baby?" my sister-in-law asked. Ava wasn't able to answer as she wailed. I didn't blame her. I was just about to wail myself. "You're bleeding," I heard my brother say. He pointed at my leg, and I looked down and saw a bright red stain slowly spreading across my trouser leg. I gingerly pulled it back, peeling away my skin to reveal several long scratches across the back of my leg, like something had tried to grab my heel. "Must have scraped something down there," I mumbled. Now that I was aware of them and the adrenaline was petering out, the wound was really beginning to sting. My brother said something about having the scratches checked out in case of tetanus or something. Then he and his wife turned their attention to their inconsolable daughter and headed back to their room, leaving me alone with the gaping black of the basement door. I could feel menace radiating from the darkness, very cautious to make no sudden moves as though the door were the open maw of an alligator. I slowly swung the door shut. Even shut, I could feel the hatred beating against it from the other side. I placed the key into the keyhole and locked it, then allowed myself to breathe once again. 2 sharp raps sounded overhead. Yeah, I know, Knox. It wasn't over. My brother and family decided in the morning not to stay in the house. They hadn't been able to get much out of Ava, but they definitely got the picture she did not want to be back in my house. I felt exactly the same way. They packed up and made ready to leave. Ava came up to me to get a cuddle goodbye. I knelt down to her level and she gave me a knowing look. "Was it the little girl?" I asked. "She said I had to, or she'd eat my mom and dad," Ava said with a nod. I think my mind went blank after that. I don't remember saying goodbye to my brother and his wife. I don't remember the car leaving. I just remember standing in the driveway, facing my house, and wondering whether I should go in or not. My leg was beginning to ache from the gashes on it. I hadn't done much other than to dab it with a tissue to make the bleeding stop. They were deeper than I thought, and they had a ragged quality to them. Finally, I decided I'd find a clinic open on Saturday and have it bandaged properly while I considered what to do. I passed by the basement door to get ready. In the morning light, that hateful aura was missing from the door. Well, that was a relief at least. When I saw the doctor, he asked me if I'd been attacked. I laughed sheepishly and said it was some furniture in the corner. He raised an eyebrow at me quizzically. Then, silently, raised a hand, made it into a claw, and gently drew it across the bandage where the cut had been. Those cuts certainly weren't made by furniture in the corner, not even by an animal's claw. They'd been made by a hand. "Are you sure you're safe? Do you need any help?" the doctor asked kindly. I was sure I was not safe, and I was very sure I needed help, but I shook my head. What could I say? I had been abused by a demonic entity in my basement, getting nothing else out of me. The doctor resigned to put accident down on the cause of injury. It had been a long wait to see the doctor, so it was well after lunch when I left the clinic. I sat down at a fast food outlet, still unsure of what to do when my brother called me. He told me they had relocated to a hotel somewhere in the city, and I was welcome to join them for dinner. I said sure. Heck, it was my treat after a bad night, I said. He chuckled softly and said dealing with night terrors was all part of being a parent. Then he also said they realized that they were missing a milk bottle. They think Ava had been holding a milk bottle when she went down to the basement, as she usually fell asleep with one. I told my brother I'd look, even though I wasn't going to step foot in that basement for $1 million. I have a problem saying no, though. I sat down the phone and thought about the basement with the milk bottle lying in that odd, ominous space, collecting dust. That's when it hit me. The milk. The cups of liquid that were finished by morning. The nibbles of bread I left out. What if it hadn't been Knox? What if the thing in the basement wandered out at night and ate things? I squirmed at the thought, but I remembered once having visited some old cottages while on tour in the UK. The guide had pointed out a metal saucer of milk and some biscuits, artfully sat across a large flat rock close to the cottage entrance. Apparently it was a centuries-old tradition from the homeowner to leave milk and biscuits out for the fae that wandered through and around the house in the witching hours. He also pointed to a corner of the building where the angle had been beveled away. He said it was because they believed the stone intruded upon a fae path, so they cut it away to let the fae folk pass unhindered. The joke was that the cottage was haunted too, but the inhabitants were far more afraid of angering the fae than the resident ghosts. Did I now find myself in a similar position? I went home and packed a bag. I would have cleaned my house up after the guests left, and there was no presence from the basement door in the light of day, but my imagination wouldn't stop me wondering if I'd turned a corner or opened a door to find some scary little girl looking at me. 100 times, absolutely not. I had decided that I would test this fae theory of mine before making any further decisions. Just before I left, I poured a glass of milk and left it to the side of the basement door with a slice of bread. Then, making sure it was the very last thing I had to do, I unlocked the basement and hurried out the front door. I went out for dinner with my brother and his family. Ava seemed to have mostly recovered from her previous night's trauma. They didn't ask me about the missing bottle. Maybe they forgot, or maybe they knew something was off with the basement. I didn't tell anyone I wasn't going home that night. Instead, I spent an uneasy night in a cheap motel reading up on folklore. Turns out there's a lot of cultures where people leave out milk, food, even animal blood, just around the house to appease strange nocturnal humanoid creatures. Some of those creatures play pranks. Others suck the blood out of your toes and stole babies out of their cribs. Charming. In the morning, I headed back to my house. First thing I did was walk very cautiously over to the kitchen. Sure enough, the milk was at a lower level than when I'd left it. There were also nibbles out of the bread. A sharp rap came from somewhere deep in the house. One knock for yes. That first day, I waited for nightfall in the kitchen. I had a bag packed in the car just in case. I needed to, make a break for it. I was breaking out in a cold sweat, but I held my ground. The aura of menace never came out of the door. At around 1 in the morning, I very cautiously went up to my room and locked my door. As an extra precaution, thanks to my research, I poured a line of iron filings along the threshold of my room. Fae don't like iron, right? At least that's what the stories say. The sense of fear never returned to the basement door for a long time. And that seems to be how I formed a truce with the thing living in the basement. Every night I leave milk and a piece of bread on the kitchen floor by the basement door. It doesn't always eat it. One last note, and I add this as a note because I'm still unsure of what I saw was true or not. One night I was at home late for some reason or another. I hastily washed the dishes, locked the doors, and set out my peace offering on the kitchen floor. It was dark by then, and the windows were black panes. I turned the lights off one by one, backing towards the stairs, handing ownership of the downstairs to the night things. I ascended to the upper floor and finally turned off the stair lights. Besides the other night, fleeing with Ava through the basement, of which I received scratches on my calf as payment for breaking the rules, it was the only time I ever broke the rules. Maybe I heard something or saw something out of the corner of my eye. For whatever reason, I turned around and looked down into the darkness. There, on the third or fourth step of the stairs, was a pale, small hand, raised out and reaching towards me. It connected to an impossibly long arm that snaked towards the kitchen, losing itself around the corner. In an instant, it whipped back into the shadows, out of sight. It was so fast, the whole thing might have just been a trick of my eyes. Regardless, I fled to my room and never ever glanced back into the darkness of the house again. I would like to say that besides that possible imaginary instance, I had no further dealings with the thing in the basement. But that's not the case. No, I'm afraid, as mad as it might sound, I would need its help, as the house went from mildly haunted to what the heck am I going to do now? You're still here. I thought you might be. Thanks for joining me for tonight's story. If your insatiable appetite for horror knows no bounds, might I suggest one of our playlists, or one of our previous stories in the archive? There should be one appearing at the end of the story any minute now. And of course, if you're not subscribed, why not go ahead and hit that subscribe button? Maybe hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of the spooky things that we do here. If you prefer your horror a little more analog, you can always pick up one of my books. There's a link below to my latest, and it'll take you to all the great things that I've posted on Amazon. For my book lovers in the audience, I always suggest coming on down to Patreon so you can become part of my ghostly reader tier and get a book anytime I write one, which is usually about twice a year. Speaking of my patrons, let's go ahead and thank them, shall we? Thanks to Unicorn Hollow for being our spooky ghost contributor. Thanks to Janet and Lady Vengeance for being our spooky skeleton tier contributors. Thanks to Hi Stacy, Winter, Xaronan, Emily Coltsfoot, Stephanie Carrington, Marianne Schuler, Tyler Parker, and Jennifer Damron for being our ghostly reader tier contributors. Thanks, everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you. If you think you might like to support the show in a more monetary fashion, come on down to Patreon. I have many tiers. I'm sure you'll find one that suits you best. I always recommend the Ghostly Reader tier, since you get a signed book anytime I write one on your doorstep. But I have many tiers, and again, I'm sure you'll find one to suit you. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.